Excuse me, everybody at the URTeC 2019. This is the PBE podcast speaking, and we are inside the Icon Science booth, and we are about to speak to a world-renowned
geomechanics.
Say it again, Skips.
Geomechanics.
World-renowned
geomechanics wizard. Learn from the best.
Learn from the best. We're going to talk to him about it just generally. We're going to talk about the issues that we have in the unconventional play, the issues that have created the URTeC 2019, that we continuously every year publish 2,000 plus papers because we're all trying to understand what's going on in these unconventional plays. So here we are. We're in 2019, and we're going to try to address these things, and we're going to talk to Sir Mr. Stephen Wilson.
That's correct.
Okay, Stephen Wilson, welcome to the PBE podcast. Stay up on the mic. Don't be afraid to scream because we're really excited to talk to you about you.
Okay, well, thanks, guys.
Okay, so the conception part of the play. How did Stephen Wilson, the world-renowned geomechanics, how did you get
well,
it?
you said it, but
you
thank
said it again.
But thank you
agreed.
anyway.
You agreed.
You agreed. You agreed. How did it happen? How did you get to this point? How are you in Apache right now? And how are you running these organizations? And what's the let's talk about it.
Take us through the story. Take us through the story.
Okay, well, a long time ago, I was a civil engineer.
Okay.
So I did an undergraduate degree at a place called Swansea, where Rockfield Software originated from. So they're here at this session too. And then I went to Manchester and did a PhD. And became a football fan and a soccer fan, I should say. And then,
are you a Swansea?
I also support Swansea City, I suppose, but I suppose.
I suppose.
Yeah.
But Man U or Man City?
Well, Manchester United is probably anyway. We digress a bit because I played rugby all the way through school. So but anyway, so I became a civil engineer. Looking at soil mechanics, which was my background.
At the time that you were learning that stuff, was it primarily funded from the oil and gas industry saying that we need to do this, or was it like a concrete company saying, "Hey, how does the fracturing of just something solve?"
Okay, so well, my research was funded by the government, so it's slightly different to the in the US. Okay, and I was looking at soil mechanics models about how rocks deform, how soils deform and compress. And so for a few years, I worked as a civil engineer, working for a company called Fugro, who are sort of who are a big sort of offshore site investigation company. So I spent several weeks bobbing around on a boat in the North Sea, taking soil samples. And
in the North Sea, that's cool.
In the North Sea, and then after a while, I went to BP Research in Sunbury, and I started off looking at steam injection into tar sands.
Steam injecting into tar sands. I love the idea.
So all the huff and puff stuff that's going on in Canada at the moment, we were looking at that for Wolf Lake back in 1988.
Okay.
And then sort of all sands fell out of favor, and I started then looking at weak sands, because going from soils to weak rocks isn't much of a sort of jump. And so for most of my early career, I was involved with completions design and sand production prediction.
Oh, really?
And I worked for BP for about 4 or 5 years, and then I left them and worked for URTeC in Salt Lake City.
URTeC,
who are now a Schlumberger company.
Right.
And so
you were breaking cores at that point.
And so we were doing hydraulic fracturing tests. So I knew a lot about rock mechanics and laboratory testing. I went back to BP in the UK. Okay. And I worked there for 5 years, doing mostly wellbore stability and completions design.
So what were the completions designs like when you started at BP, Fugro, and then how have they evolved to today?
Well, the big difference then compared to now is that, and particularly as we're sitting here at URTeC, the big, I was at least around in the sort of the old days, if you like, where we drilled through shale and you found a nice sandstone reservoir, and so you were concerned about sandstone fracturing. Now, of course, the sort of reservoir is almost indistinguishable from the overburden.
Exactly.
On one particular scale.
Wow.
And so that is one very big change that, that we've gone from at least as far as URTeC's concerned, perhaps, we've gone from sort of frac packs in Gulf of Mexico, weak sediments, which is where I started doing a lot of hydraulic fracturing work, and then you'd be looking at the tight Cotton Valley sandstones, and now it's sort of evolved to these sort of massive fracs in sort of high angle wells, and so we would. Even back in the late 90s, we were drilling horizontal wells in sandstone reservoirs, but you'd be running screens or some form of sand control. Now we've got horizontal wells and massive hydraulic fractures, and this sort of, I talk about massive is getting more massive every year.
Yeah, we need another word.
Yeah.
We need another word for it.
It went from a mile to a mile and a half, to now these super lateral. Well, their new record was
3.2. 3.2 mile lateral.
Yeah, in the Midland Basin.
That? In the Midland Basin. What?
It's sort of outstanding. Yeah.
The fact that they're pumping.
From the surface
and fluid from the surface.
Down
the lateral. 10,000 feet, and then 3.5 miles out. Into a perf.
Like this. And nothing's changed. It's not density stratifying itself by any means, or is it? Right? It's density stratifying itself for sure when you start from the surface, get down in temperature and pressure. In the casing, you kind of have control of that, but then it's blowing out 3.2 miles from the heel out to the toe, and you're trying to initiate a frac out there. There has to be some major assumptions of what's changing in all those pills and everything we drop down these things. That all has to be reacting and, right?
Or is that something that can be calculated out?
Well, certainly the flow in the wellbore is very well understood. So I don't think there's too much we don't understand about that.
So you have a section of whatever you want to call the first stage that hits the frac, and then you have a smaller section of like a clay reducer, and then you have slick water again with some other proppant. When that whole thing goes down the lateral, into the curve, out to 3.2 miles away, it is understood that kind of stays together. It doesn't mix up and get all wild.
Well, it probably does.
Okay. All right.
But at least in terms of the sort of gross, the pad, the proppant stages, that we understand how these things are placed. Because you can see it in the pressure chart. As soon as the proppant hits the perfs, you get an increase in pressure,
That's awesome.
And that comes in. Roughly on a time, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. That's a great really question, cool. Man. Yeah. Great question. There's so much I want to talk about with you because you understand how to put a crack in rocks, and that is where we are in this industry. We are trying to figure this out more so than ever on really it sounds like the industry's going, and this is from a presentation I watched, the Southwest section in Fort Worth from who was the geophysicist at Pioneer? Oh my gosh, my buddies are going to kill me over this. But anyway, it was a geophysicist, longtime geophysicist at Pioneer, and his presentation was really about we have to be able to increase our ability to create as much new crystal face of our rock and our reservoir as possible near wellbore. Near sweet spot, right, is the ideal way to say that. It's hard to define that, but it's all about the complexity and breaking up the rock in as much as possible. Right? Is that accurate to say?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
And the reason I would say no is because when we first started moving into the unconventional realm, in places like the Barnett Shale, where the two horizontal stresses are quite close together.
Okay, so not much anisotropy.
Or places like the Marcellus, where you certainly have two orthogonal joint sets.
Okay.
When they light up, you see complexity. So this idea of shattering, in fact, it even came up in it was mentioned in one of the plenary sessions in the kickoff this morning by somebody from WPX Energy when they were talking about shattering this sort of like a car windscreen shattering.
That's ideally.
That kind of model is exceptionally idealized,
right?
And other than occurring in one or two sort of exceptional areas where you have very low stress anisotropy, I don't believe we're seeing the amount of complexity that people exist. So certainly within the Midland Basin, a lot of the fractures we see and have monitored are all very planar and very little complexity is being built into these fractures.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. So that's kind of. Let's drill down into what do you want to drill down to on the completion side, geomechanics. Let's drill down into what.
I want to know in particular. You're talking about fracturing these sands and how to bust up these sands when we're going laterally. Now we're moving more into the shales. Totally different type of, like,
a true shale,
unconventional shale. How these rocks are breaking, the brittleness index, and I'm talking about that transition. Because in your career, you're so focused on the softer stuff. And all of a sudden now it's these.
And now I'm worried about the sort of.
We all are. We're all so worried.
Terrified.
And I think the whole industry has gone through a big shift.
Yeah.
You know, that I can think of several people who have sort of reinvented themselves several times over. As they've gone from a progression from understanding sort of. Sandstone reservoir fracturing, the Cotton Valley stuff, you know, and now they became experts in sort of fracturing shale rocks, and so, you know, you can still teach an old dog new tricks.
How did you know I was thinking that in the back of my head? How did you know?
Because I'm an old dog, and I'd like to think I have one or two new tricks up my sleeve at least.
I bet you do. You know what's interesting, and this is maybe a little off topic, but I'm going to go to a comment that you said, which was the industry's just changed. We've evolved so much from our beginning of understanding of how to put fracs away to today. Would you agree with that just kind of generalized paraphrase I had?
Yeah.
So when I think about, and this is again off topic, but when I think about how long geoscientists have really been studying the Earth, right, and our concepts just generally through time when it comes to just physics, we're talking Isaac Newton days to today. I would argue that nothing evolves that fast with humankind. It might look like it does when you're in the jungle, right, and you're fighting, and you got somebody coming for you, right? You feel like that's major evolution happening, and there's a new kingdom in 100 years and all that stuff. But in the overall scheme of things, what really, not much has changed. We have baseball caps and suits on, right? The idea of that. But in our time span of completions and putting engineers away, it feels like we've evolved so much and there's so many new ideas and so much advancement. But let's take a step back, I would argue, and let's just think about it as basic of an evolution as possible and really how much has evolved. What are we talking? We're going slick water 100 mesh on everything kind of idea. What did it... Right, when we think about it, I don't know. I thought I'd bring that up.
Some of these things, some of these things are very perennial.
Yeah.
You know, because you would say that there's a huge science around wellbore stability, and you know the fundamental equations came from Kirsch in sort of 1898, because he was a German engineer trying to design gun barrels for the German Navy, which is where those equations were sort of formulated from. And so, even to move towards the unconventional realm, you know, there's a lot of work. You know, there's a lot of interest around poroelasticity and stress shadow effects and things like this. And the original papers and formulations originally came from Snedden and Elliott, or Snedden, which were published in 1946 and 1948.
Wow.
You know, and so for some things, you'd say things have evolved very slowly.
Yeah.
And then in other areas, things have been are evolving incredibly quickly. And where I would make that a distinction, I would say would be between software has improved.
Yep.
Okay. The speed of software, the slickness of software. But I think the big game changer with the unconventional world, and that's possibly where ICON has, a sort of a foothold and a sort of a leading position, has really been at this whole issue around rock physics and integration and things like rock physics is not separate from geomechanics, which is not separate from seismic interpretation anymore. In order to get
having a platform more or less where you're able to take all of that data. Maybe in the past we were just making these very basic rock physics cross plots, right? VPVS, rho B, density. I mean, whatever. So you have these very basic cross plots. Now we have the ability to take those cross plots, apply them to our seismic data, right? We're able to run a full field inversion and take those geomechanical properties, and now we can start making those predictions. Is that?
Well, also the boundaries have all been completely blurred because there was a time when, say, just a petrophysicist might be interested in these cross plots, or you might have a seismic rock properties person who would be concerned around, how sort of, mu rho and VSVP ratios, that's part of my world now. Whereas, say, maybe 5 or 8 years ago, that was not something that I would be concerned about. So I think everybody in the unconventional realm has had to retool themselves, retrain themselves. And I think that the sort of delineation between what's a geomechanics person and what's a rock physics person and what's a completions design guy has actually faded quite substantially now.
You're saying the impedance basically between the three have faded. They're kind of just merging in.
Yes.
We don't have the differentiation.
And that's why geomechanics has now become a very broad church, right? Because at one point, geomechanics was really rock mechanics. You knew about rock squashing, and that was the realm of the rock mechanics people. Whereas now, whether it's rock mechanics, geomechanics, rock physics, really, to me, these are all, it's all one big. The world is one big Venn diagram now, and I think where you have to work is in the overlap. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the overlap is, but
just
you have
pick
to.
one.
But you have to work in an overlap. If you're if you're a sort of a holdout sitting in some space that doesn't overlap with anything else, then I think you're missing the boat somewhat. You're missing the unconventional boat.
I think that right there, at a very high level, higher than we've been able to articulate. More or less. Explains the point of this podcast,
100%,
right? Being able to integrate, especially now, you don't see someone who's just a black box geologist, petrophysicist, rock physicist. Like
we don't have time for it. We don't have time for it.
But being able to be interdisciplinary and just kind of do a little bit of everything, understand a little bit of everything. You might have your specialty, but having, being able to just kind of see the issues that would arise with your completions engineer, with your rock physicist, and predicting those problems before you even run a model, I think that's huge.
Now so we got a few minutes left to close this down. Let's take your experience, because this is the Permian Basin experience, and let's go with the concepts that we just talked about and this integration problem. How are we training people's philosophy? Because that's what it's coming down to. It's our individual philosophy of addressing a problem and understanding the data that you have to work with to answer the problem. Now, some people's philosophy will take the data and try to answer that problem, assuming they can actually answer the problem. So that's a major problem. That's why we have managers and people with experience. So how do you address the philosophy problem in our industry with young professionals, young engineers, young geologists, young geoscientists who did not come from academia, who integrates? Academia probably separates worse than the industry. This is a major problem, and I would love your feedback and your experience and everything that you got going on. Your answer is just going to be fascinating to me. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing I would say is that I don't see it as a massive problem.
Oh, wow.
I see it as a massive opportunity.
Hey!
Okay.
You are a half glass full type man.
Because I think one of the biggest challenges we face is because we haven't really touched on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And of course, there's always this joke, that if you're over 35, you use Excel, and if you're under 35, you use Spotfire. Okay. And I think it's the same kind of parallels. So awesome. I started off as a modeling guy, and I still like running models and coming up with deterministic solutions.
Absolutely.
But absolutely now what you're seeing is there is a shift where you would say that that you're using science and models to inform a far smarter artificial intelligence neural network kind of solution. And who's actually sort of, so who's the monkey and who's the organ grinder is perhaps going to change now as the future evolves. And so what I think you'll find is that you'll have modeling underpinning AI, artificial intelligence, neural network solutions. And I think that's going to be the future of the industry within at least the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. But in terms of sort of younger people joining the industry, they can program in C++. They understand Python. They understand R. The tools that they have at their fingertips. So I may not be able to code as well as I used to, but certainly, I think the role of people like myself and other people who have had a lot of experience is actually trying to feed back.
You understand the biases that need to be put into the machine.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely does.
So I think our sort of role is to basically enable, this sort of younger generation of engineers to sort of, capitalize on the skill set, their specific skill set, which is slightly different from the skill set that I came in with. And so that's where I can see in the short term a big churn in the industry happening. But I would still fall back to my viewpoint that when times get tough, we absolutely know that sort of the world of physics has to be obeyed. So you need guys who understand mechanics very well.
Right.
And even though perhaps their solutions will take longer to evolve compared to, say, an artificial neural network, but absolutely, the artificial neural network can always throw up spurious correlations, and I think that's the role of the sort of the mechanical related or the mechanics related people, basically to ground truth or to test some of the the quicker solutions that'll come out of AI kind of correlations.
Wow. I mean, we can't end that show any better way. Skippo, you got anything? I mean, I think this is the close.
I think that's it.
That was. If you would do a future show with us where we can actually sit down for more than an hour, I mean, if we could do that with you, that would be absolutely fascinating. I pray that Apache is allowing interns to work under some people like you and all their interns to work under somebody like you.
Oh, absolutely. We have a very big program with people looking at machine learning, data analytics, and in fact, many of our young rotational engineers will have a project where they will be, developing some of these sort of neural networks, Spotfire kind of sort of experiences.
Wow. That was awesome.
That was amazing.
Sir, thank you so much.
Dr. Wilson.
Well, thanks, guys.
I can say doctor, right?
Yeah, yes.
Dr. Professor?
Yes, you can, yeah.
Doctor, thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Okay.
We out.
Bye.